anything brought forward lacked any evidentiary value whatsoever and was nothing more than hearsay. And that was on the appeal. And that's where the permits of the plant sort of court process stopped. They didn't continue to appeal after that.
Can you simply take a chapter out of your environmental reviews, shift them over to Millennium, and say, here you go?
Well, I think they were asking FERC to do it, right? Because it's FERC's permit. I think what FERC did with the Florida case was they did the calculations. There was no, if the calculations come out X, then Y. If it comes out Y, then Z. There's none of that. It was just calculate them. So could FERC calculate them, and then would the New York DEC approve the permit? I don't know. We would, that information is certainly available. We'd be glad to provide it to whomever if that is the concern. We're not sure that'll get us there. I mean, when you look at how much Millennium has done within their permitting process for this lateral, there's 12 stream crossings. They're HDD, and 9 of them. 2 will be dry when they construct, so there's no impact to water quality. So they've, you know, and not at insignificant cost, over 45% increase to the project. And I think what's really important is even with the state denial, Millennium's going to continue to do all of that. And it's just the right thing to do, and that's real money.
You're not doing the fracking, but the big concern is that the fracking is what's going to be used to bring in the oil. Do you have any concerns about that?
Well, I think, you know, fracking is a big conversation, right? I think people, when you look at the status quo of drilling oil from all over the world, shipping it across the planet, bringing it here, refining it, and then using it, compared to something you can pull out of the ground and ship right to the plant, no refinery process, people aren't looking at it, in my view, holistically. Now, in terms of natural gas in general. Now, when it comes to fracking, the same percentage of fracking that comes to our plant is the same percent that's going to go to your home heating. We don't contract with who pulls it from the ground or how it's pulled. There's no difference. There's been some claims that fracked gas is different than other natural gas. It's not. It's just how it's extracted.
Which is what could cause the uncertainty.
It's the uncertainty people have. But I would say compared to what we're using today, when you modernize with this plant, you'll use less of it. That's the point that I think we're using. Let's just make up a number. We're using 100 today. When we come online, that number is going to go down. So if you're concerned about fracking and you want to do less of it, then modernize the grid. You can't build wind farms where there's no wind. You can't put solar farms if you want power at night. We don't make the technology. What we do is we try to solve the power concerns that people have and the challenges they have. In the lower Hudson Valley, you're in an area that's constrained with transmission constraints, and you don't have great renewable resources here. I have solar on my house. Well, we're not anti-solar. The point is, you don't have enough of it here, and the battery technology isn't available yet to make it 24/7.
But will more wells be drilled through fracking in order to have enough gas to supply your plant?
We'll use less of it once we're online than it's being used today. It's the same pipe.
In theory, you'll knock out a plant that you
If nothing else, there'll be fewer of them.
That's right.
Required. And that's really important. If in the simplistic world of X number of wells equals X number of megawatts, with a certain heat rate, when a lower heat rate comes in, you'll need fewer wells. You know, and then it's that simple. With this, you know, simplistic view of it, but it would be different if load growth was going 5-6% and we were building to meet that growth. Load growth is flat in New York, less than 1%. So we're not building to meet that. We're building because we know we can compete and win with the installed base today, and that we can get into the power markets, we can lower rates, we can lower emissions, and we can make money doing it. And in the lower Hudson Valley, you have very limited options if you want to add, if you want to modernize the grid, if you want to add generation. You can bring in new transmission lines. I mean, that's one way to do it. But you're bringing in generation from upstate. And we think that'll probably happen. I think the Energy Highway will go forward at some point. And I think you're going to see more transmission lines come in, and that will unlock a lot of the upstate wind. That's where the natural resources are to bring in wind power. If you put 100 megawatts of wind turbines up here, you're not going to get much power out of those. The wind just isn't here. And when you have renewables, and again, we've developed wind projects all over the country. We manage biomass plants. We're not anti-renewable. It's just they have a place and time, and you're inviting Mother Nature to the table, and she gets to vote. And so in places where you don't have those, the next best thing is maximize your energy efficiency, reduce as much as you can how much you have to use, but then put in generation that's the highest tech, most environmentally responsible, and that's what we're doing.
Why do you think you're losing support from county officials, including the county executive? It's kind of a bipartisan folks on both sides are saying that
Yeah.
they've got issues.
I think it's an election year in New York, and I think people, it's hard to predict how people will respond. We haven't lost, I'd say, I could point to Senator Bonasek, who we have retained as a strong supporter. I think the more people look at the facts, and not necessarily the facts that we're producing, again, third-party groups that have no financial interest in this plant are producing the data that I'm telling you today. This isn't stuff we've commissioned people to tell us.
So you think the county executive, this is a political decision on his part not to support this?
I don't understand how someone can look at, me personally, I don't understand how someone can look at modernizing the grid and reducing emissions and costs as being a negative to a community. I don't understand that.
I don't think that's been the county executive's argument. I think the county executive's hung his case on Kelly.
Well,
on
yeah, and so,
on the,
fair enough.
the bribery case.
Yeah.
For
And so-
people who aren't familiar with that,
Yeah,
involving a former executive of your company and a former top aide.
that's a very fair point. So, if you look at that case, it was around potentially trying to get a contract for the plant through the Energy Highway. This plant is completely merchant built. We are not getting a single dollar from the state. So, if that was part of the concern, it didn't happen. The permits we've talked about were challenged in court, upheld in court. And that's what I've read too, that we're concerned about the permits. If you read the court case, it's pretty clear that the judge, and upon appeal, was very clear that the DEC acted appropriately in giving us our permits. And then the reciprocity has nothing to do with this plant. It's a exchange of carbon credits with New Jersey that's bigger than any one plant and has nothing to do with the Valley plant.
Do you think that the problems you're having with the DEC now might be a function of the governor or other factions in Albany trying to distance themselves from this project?
I don't know. It's hard for me to speculate. I'd ask you to ask them that question and see what they say. The permits that we need, we have. This is really Millennium. It's a separate company. It's not tied to any of the investigation work. So I don't know why that would bleed over. The pipeline permitting isn't a CPV activity. It's a Millennium activity. And we've not been involved in that permitting process other than to be the customer. So if there's that concern, it shouldn't include Millennium. Any questions online?
By the way, this is a chart that Tom was referring to that shows the decrease in emissions by power plants from 2000 to 2016. It's pretty dramatic. That's a report produced every year by the New York Independent System Operator on the status of the power grid.
In a couple of years, when Indian Point is shut down,
Yep.
a couple questions. One, how crucial is the power you produce going to be for replacing it?
Yep.
And two, does that erode your emissions argument a little bit because you would be replacing a plant that emits virtually nothing?
So that's a good question. So when you look at Indian Point, it's roughly 2,200 megawatts. They announced their retirement of that plant with an agreement with the state. That was announced, a year and a half ago now, maybe
About
2
that,
years.
yeah.
So this project started in '08. So when we looked at our economic case, when we looked at the project, it was competing. Indian Point was expected to be there the next 20 years. So when we looked at the math on coming in, it was with them in there. The New York ISO is currently doing an analysis on the potential reliability concerns if Indian Point were to retire. Right now, I can say the biggest impact would be economic. When you take those megawatts out of because, you know, when you bid fuel in, nuclear's pretty cheap, comparatively. It's also not very volatile. So, the biggest impact will be economic. If the markets were to react with 2,200 megawatts going away, with nothing coming in, you'd see a pretty dramatic increase in prices. Our plant will mitigate that to the tune of almost $650 million a year. So we can offset, to a degree, the market impacts of that. When you say, does it mitigate the emissions? No, because we would have never displaced Indian Point anyway. We're displacing an older generation. Now, when they go away, now you're going to have almost pure fossil in the lower part of the state. But that's not, you know, I don't know what else you bring in.
So it's still the last fossil in.
The last fossil in is what they call, the plant that's on the margin that will be displacing. So we're still going to be you won't go as far up the stack. You'll have cleaner options, better options, which we'll be a part of. So it does not at all mitigate the emissions concern. And if anything, it points to the added reliability that we'll bring in a dual fuel unit outside of New York City, one of the few. I don't believe Cricket Valley that's coming in is dual fuel. It's not. So we have an additional reliability benefit. Obviously, the market impact will not be insignificant. When you take those megawatts out, you have something that can compete at a lower level than what's out there today. And then by definition, the emissions will be, they're going to, if you compare us to a zero emitting source, then it's an increase. But when you look at how the market settles, we're displacing the most expensive unit out there, which is going to be a higher emitting, less efficient plant, not Indian Point.
We're still looking at 25 full-time jobs when it's up and running.
Yeah, full-time jobs on the plant site. We currently have roughly 800 on site right now, and have had them all year. It's been very active. I will say that it's been it's a fascinating process to watch. But we have currently roughly around 800 and 25 full-time.
In simple terms, how much will customers' electric bills decrease when the plant opens?
Yeah, so once we're full up, you know, running in energy, and, you know, it's hard to, I can tell you how much the market will be impacted. I don't know how much your bill is going to be impacted, because I don't know how much you're going to use. I don't know what the weather's going to be like, you know. I can tell you that if you look at when we come in, we'll displace, it's a $650 million reduction. Now, does that mean your bill's going to go down $10? I don't know. Maybe you buy a new TV in a dozen, or a new computer. It's hard to put that in those terms, and I hesitate to do that because what I don't want is someone to look at their bill in 3 years and go, "Hey, my bill didn't go down," because there's a lot of reasons why it might not have gone down an individual's bill. I can tell you the market impact will have. Now, where the market settles, you know, if some plant breaks, then, you know, we'll still have reduced based on us competing against old generation. We'll have reduced that money, that amount of money, but it may not necessarily translate directly to someone's bill dollar for dollar, because there's just, you know, weather, you know, some plant breaking, stuff in your house. There's just a lot of variables. Right?
You've got some idea as to
It's hard to put it to a
general
consumer.
use, how much you're using now, if nothing has changed, if you haven't suddenly.
Yeah, and we could do that. I haven't calculated a consumer's bill yet. I mean,
Really?
we have, not in individuals, no, because it's even, look, I used to work at the New York ISO, and we would do consumer impact analysis, and when, you know, we're on the new capacity zone, and it's just really, really hard because there are just a colossal number of variables. And it's not like, I mean, I'll very much defend the math that we have to show you how much we're going to take out of the market. That is very solid. How that translates then down into an individual's home bill is really tough to do with certainty. I mean, if you took out all the variables, you can say, okay, roughly this, but it's hard to do that.
But that's one of the chief selling points for the host community.
Yeah.
And I understand what you're saying about how complex it is to calculate that with the number of variables involved. But isn't there a way to describe that to the average person who in Orange County who
we could,
is wondering how
how that's going to matter to them
it's gonna
individually? Yeah. So, I mean, we can certainly give that a shot, I guess.
Right.
I mean, I think it's a little, I understand the desire to have that, but it's also, you know, we're buying municipal wastewater, they're gonna see a decline in their water bills. We're gonna pay a significant amount of taxes, they should, you know, they're gonna see, more money flowing into their schools. I mean, and even the jobs question, 20 to 24 within the plant. But think of the economic growth that's gonna occur regionally because of the plant. I mean, even the opposition says Legoland wouldn't have come here without having, you know, low-cost power available. How many jobs is that? I mean, it's hard to put things in little bitty boxes that you can digest when you gotta take a step back and say, on a macro view, it's just, there's a significant amount of growth and upside when these things, when you bring in low-cost, reliable local power. Manufacturing, high-energy costs, server farms, all those things, hospital expansions, those things can now have the electricity they need to execute those programs.
Once again, somebody asked questions, and obviously you're looking to take credit for.
I'm not sure, I didn't take credit, I said they gave us credit for it.
But somebody's suggesting.
I've never even talked to them, they suggested it.
That's somebody's a comment, but again, as you attempt to look to break it down.
Yeah.
There is that question.
That's a good point. We'll get back to that. We'll see, I'll get with our economists and see if there's a way that we can do it, that we can defend. Because what my concern is, like I said, in 2-3 years, if someone brings me a before and after, I want to be able to defend it.
Yeah, because you're saying someone's gonna say it, but yeah, we ask you, so how, and
They'll see it in the wholesale cost of their power. You know, we haven't calculated how many dollars that will be. And so what we could do is freeze how much they're using today, freeze inflation, freeze all the variables, and just do 3 years from now.
Is it possible to, I mean, the variables are always gonna be there, but is it possible, to Steve's question about, had the plant been running for 3 years,
Yeah.
those variables in the past are not changing. If you overlay your process into it, what would happen to the cost then?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is if we freeze all the variables
Yeah.
now and say that, you know, if I take, we'll get,
Yeah.
I live in New York, so I'll just give them my power bill and say, based on what I'm paying per kilowatt hour now, flat, no inflation, no changes to anything other than adding our plant, what would that look like in 3 years?
Okay.
I mean, we could probably take a look at that.
The whole.
Understanding that's not reality.
I'm
Because you
not- I'm
don't
not trying
freeze
to-
all those
I'm not
things,
trying to
yeah.
say-
And that's
I'm
the,
not trying to say freeze the go-forward variables. I'm saying if your plant was up 3 years ago, what would my price be today under you versus what I paid for the past 3 years?
yeah, okay. I don't know if we have access to all the market clearing, that, because what you do is you'd have to find out what unit was setting price, and if you displace them, let's say the unit set price was a 200 megawatt unit, you're 650, so that's one. But you're gonna displace 650 megawatts, maybe not just the one that set price that day. So it's more complicated than it sounds, and I'm not trying to be evasive. I think the easiest way to do it is just take, you know, lock the variables, and then, yeah, we'll take a look at it. And we'll share the math, so people can pop holes in it, but we'll certainly take a look at that.
What kind of outreach in 2008 and going forward did you do in the community, and do you wish you had done more, given that this opposition to the plant seems to have arisen just in the last couple of years? You know, after the project had already been through the planning board.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll let Steve talk to it in detail, but, you know, one of the concerns people said is there wasn't much outreach. We held over 100 meetings, presentations. We went into places where if English wasn't the primary language, we hired translators on our own accord. The process is by design. There are places for community input, as you know, but those are limited. And so we've maintained a website the whole time we probably get 4 or 5 inquiries a week, mostly looking for job opportunities, but you get some that are not happy with us, and you get some that have genuine questions. West Point reached out to us and wanted a tour, so we give, you know, their engineers a tour that they got credit for. You know, that dialogue has always been two-way, and we're very responsive to that. You know, when I think they said we've held 1 or 2 meetings, we've held over. I made Steve develop a spreadsheet. It's over 100 that we've held, which is beyond the pale.
Can we get a copy of the spreadsheet?
It's yours. If you got it, I don't have a problem
Their
with it.
meetings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't have, they're all public
Yeah.
meetings. I don't have a problem with it.
So, I mean, as Tom mentioned, you know, between public meetings, hearings, you know, the articles that the Times Herald Record has written, other other media that has done news stories on the project, and then presentations we've done in the local community, going out to the Kiwanis Club, the Lions Club, things like that. We've done that, and then of course through the entire permitting process, not just at the local level, but also the state level. We had to have the air permit. There were meetings. The Public Service Commission had a public meeting. It did have actually had a hearing here locally, but there were several of those over the years. And as you said, we knew all of the meetings locally, and we had a court reporter there to transcribe everything, so that it was all documented. And when folks make the comment that there was no knowledge of the projects, they often refer back to the public documents and the records of the minutes of the meeting that demonstrate that it was an open process. And throughout the entire seeker process, which took over 4 years, we had numerous meetings with the planning board, and the public was invited to come in and comment. And as part of the seeker process, we documented all of those comments and addressed them for the final environmental impact statement. So
there was a noticeable difference here between your permitting process and the Calpine power plant that was here 15 years ago and never got built. That was a state-run process. Yours was local, but those meetings had 100 people at them. Neighbors were doing a lot of what we're seeing now, but they were doing it through the entire process. Steve, I don't know if you remember any of that.
Just anecdotally.
I'm wondering. I don't know if I don't know what the difference was between the two, but it does seem like the opposition came much later.
Yeah.
This time. Maybe it's have you done any Article 10 plants or?
no, that's a key difference, Article 10 versus seeker. And the local planning board, the town of Wawayanda, was not happy about that process. They wanted to be involved and basically have the ability to control the timetable, make sure everything was addressed in terms of all the comments, and all of the local concerns were addressed as part of the seeker process. So they were actually very strong in assuming lead agency role, which is allowed under the seeker rules. They were allowed to assume lead agency, and they hired all of the technical disciplines to go through and review there's over 2,000 pages of documentation in terms of analysis and reviews on the various aspects of the project. So they, the town really wanted to participate in it, not just observe a state process that was going on. So they were active in it, which we thought was the reason why, as you mentioned, Mike, the early part of this process, it had gone smoothly. We had a lot of comments. We addressed those comments as part of it. We reached out and met with local communities like the town of Goshen, their environmental review board, things like that, so that the town of Wawayanda could feel comfortable that, okay, we've gone out and addressed their concerns as part of the seeker process.
There's a big difference in having the local planning board take the driver's seat, because you get local questions. There was a concern about a Native American burial ground, so there was an archaeological study done to prove that didn't occur, right? That may not, when it's being run out of Albany, you don't get those local concerns as clear. And so potentially that's why, because I think as things were raised, like that issue, it was, we could address it. We could get a study done and show that it wasn't, in fact, a concern. I also think, quite honestly, that it's not it's different when you see the plant get built, and I think it gives people the opportunity to rally around something physical, and I think that helps. It's hard to rally around a process that's occurring sometimes. If people want to get, together and to protest, it's easier when you have something physical to go to. I think that's a big part of it. And I also think some people wanted to, I think when you look at these facts, as I see them anyway, it's hard for me to say that somebody's really doing this for environmental reasons. Because by defeating the plant for environmental reasons, you're keeping the status quo, which is higher emissions, more imports from fracking, more methane. That's what you're keeping. with no solution other than we don't want this. So it's hard for me to believe that's coming from a spot of environmental concern. I think it's more, I want to run for a public seat, or, I want to, they can explain their motivations, but it's hard for me to see the environmental angle.
But even if your plant is cleaner than older plants
Yep.
in New York or elsewhere, it's, for the people who live near there, this is new. This is replacing nothing that was there. So
That's
this-
fair, yep.
So so even if it is cleaner than older plants, they're going to be breathing the emissions from that. They're concerned about that, and they're concerned about who's going to buy their house. This is for people in the immediate vicinity. Who's going to buy their house? Are those legitimate concerns?
So there's been exhaustive studies done, and not just by us, but by, again, independent, I keep saying independent groups because everybody says, well, they just pay a consultant to tell them what they want to hear. On real estate studies, and there's nothing that shows real estate values decline with the proximity to the plant. In terms of the emissions of the plant itself, if you lived outside the plant for a full year, it equals about 4 hours of mowing your lawn. That's the level of emissions that you're going to be exposed to. So are they legitimate? They're legitimate questions. I'm not saying they're legitimate concerns. If I lived here, I'd have those questions too, and I'd want them answered, and I'd want them answered in a way that I'm comfortable with. But once they are answered and addressed, then I'd move on.
Just to add to that, what Tom said is that those questions were actually brought up early on in the process as part of the seeker, and there was a lot of dialogue and discussion with the town's consultants and documentation included in the seeker documents, which were on the website, that addressed those concerns, as well as we spent a lot of time in the community with these comparisons and trying to explain to folks and put it in terms that they can appreciate in terms of the exposure that you'll get from a type of plant like this compared to everyday activities that one might do, whether it's riding in a car, subway, or a bus, or as Tom mentioned, mowing your lawn.
Mowing lawn resonates with me more than the subway, but it was about a 4-hour, mowing lawn. The other thing in terms of like home values and real estate values, we build across the country, and we just commissioned a plant and have been running it for about a year now in Maryland, and the bond rating it continues to improve for that county, right? So the cost of capital for that county is, and we can show you, they just did UBS, I think, just did it. But that means the economic health of that county is increasing dramatically because of this. That means real estate prices are going to go up. That means cost of capital for the county goes down. Those are positive things.
So the homeowners' real estate values went up in those communities? And that's
What I'm saying is when a bond rating goes up in a county, then one of the offshoots of that is real estate becomes more valuable.
But those homes closest to the,
We don't have a study on the homes closest to them, but we've done.
Yeah, we've got a study that's in the secret documents, one from New England, and then I believe the other one is from Long Island, that documented that there was no impact to real estate values as a result of a power plant being built in the community. And they attribute a lot of the no impact from the fact that you now have this large industrial base that's contributing a lot to revenue to the community. The school system gets an uptick, which of course is a big factor in terms of relocation and looking for housing. And the tax rates, helping to keep the tax rates stable or low is another key factor. So these are things that would help the maintain the property values in those communities.
and this was a study done,
The study is, like I said, one is in New England. It's in the seeker documents. There's a whole section on the real estate values, and the other one was in Long Island. I forget the years of them, but the documents are in the website. But those were all reviewed by the lead agency's socio or economic consultants as part of it.
political landscape has changed, obviously, since the project began. President Trump says the war on coal is over. How has this landscape changed for you, his openness, the administration's openness to fracking and other aspects? How does this change moving forward?
So the DOE sent the FERC a request to review whether or not the markets are sufficiently maintaining reliability. Specifically, they wanted to look at whether or not plants that can maintain 90 days of fuel on site should be compensated more, and that largely was viewed as sort of a lifeline to coal and to natural gas. On the flip side, as you said, he seems more favorable to the gas infrastructure world than the previous administration. I would say for us, under President Obama's Clean Power Plan, he modeled natural gas getting to about a 75% availability rate. A dramatic increase in natural gas, a decline in coal, a growth in renewables, and in energy efficiency. I don't think that landscape's changed. I think, personally, I think that, the president views things differently, but the markets are constructed a certain way. And whether or not it's an environmental restriction or a market, I think the markets are going to continue to drive coal into a difficult place. And we can replace those. Modernizing the grid has to be part of the solution. There just aren't renewables everywhere you want to go. And in fact, if you look at upstate New York, there's a lot of towns that are, it's hard to get land in New York to put wind turbines on right now because the local communities upstate have concerns. If it's built on your land, you get some money, but the guy next to you that's staring at it doesn't. So that has to get sorted out. The interconnection queue at one point had 8,000 megawatts of wind. Very little of that's come to fruition. I think we're sitting around 1,400 megawatts right now in the state. And it's not necessarily a money issue. It's a land use issue. It's a tax issue. We see it nationally. Like I said, we still own and operate a large wind farm in Oklahoma. We've developed a number of wind projects. It's not just economics, it's land as well. I don't know that, and there's a lot to be seen yet on how the shift in the political leadership may or may not move the needle. I think you're going to see continued refinement in the energy markets in terms of valuing things that may not be valued today, like flexibility, like putting a carbon price in energy, in your energy bid, which is a form of RGGI, if you will, where generators would have to put in a price for carbon. We support that. We support RGGI because we believe that you bring in, for lack of a better term, you put a Prius on the grid, it's better than having an old Oldsmobile, and we can make money doing it. There's nothing wrong with that still, and we think that has to be part of the solution, at least for now, until you see a significant move in technology, which isn't, in our view, in the next 5-10 years.
What is the expected lifespan of the plant?
About 30 years. I think.
30 to 40 years.
30 to
Yeah.
40.
Then what?
Then
Then what?
you decommission, like you would. You go through the whole decommissioning process, just like you'll see in Newport get ready to do here. Only less complicated.
And then it just sits there?
Or you can do repowering too, which you'll see at a lot of facilities as the technology improves and you've got the capability to repower the site. You've got the infrastructure, the electrical interconnectors there. That's the best thing to do. You've got an industrial location, so therefore put another power plant in there of a newer technology, better, more efficient.
So, to your question, this technology, we forecast the next 30, 40 years, but a lot of places we look to build are brownfields, former sites, old coal. Look at Danscamer in New York, where they went from coal to natural gas. And you can, once you have the infrastructure built there, it's a pretty attractive place to continue to upgrade the technologies. Because the electrical interconnect to the transmission system is one of the biggest challenges, and once that's worked out, it's pretty tough to give up that location. It just has inherent value at that point.
At that point, you've got municipalities that are relying on with the expectation that they will have been saved money, and to suddenly
Well, you saw that.
See with the new point.
pull the needle.
Well, you're seeing that with the New Point now in spades. You're seeing that where Danscamer,
Marlboro School District.
yeah, they shut down an entire school district, absolutely. So, it's to a point, there are people in the community that don't want these, and then when they get there, they're really important to keep, and you know, we really look forward to coming online and providing the value that I think communities see in these once they realize it's not the bear that some people envision it to be.
Do you know offhand what the pilot payments are this year for the schools and town and county?
He negotiated them.
So, the pilot payments, the overall transaction between the pilot and the host community was around $52 million. And so there were some construction year payments, and then once it goes operational, then it's an annual payment. Because at that point, we're generating revenue, so we can actually make the payments. But I don't know the annual, but it's public information. And we could get that for you if that's helpful. Yeah.
But we're also using municipal wastewater. We're purchasing that from the town too. A lot of plants pull water from streams. We're not doing that. We're using municipal wastewater, and then when we treat it and send it back, it'll be cleaner than when we got it. That's a $300,000 to $500,000 a year revenue stream for the town that should impact people's water bills. I mean, I don't know if they have infrastructure they need to build, but once that's done, it should lower people's water bills in the area.
Yeah, that's a budget line item now of revenue for the city of Middletown that they didn't have before.
Yeah.
So it's a couple of jobs, and as Tom mentioned, it could help with refurbishing some of the system.
There was a report out of the State Controller's Office 2 weeks ago criticizing a number of industrial development agencies, including Orange County's. If you're familiar with that, there was apparently a payment from Millennium to the IDA, and then the IDA used that money to do some grants and some other things. And some of the same people who are critical of CPV are looking at that and thinking, the fix is in. Millennium gave a pile of money to the IDA and got a pilot this situation with your former executive and the former aide to the governor. That's a lot of, you can decide whether it's smoke and mirrors or whether there's something legitimate going on. But there's that coincidence seems, we don't normally get one of those in a project, let alone two. How do you explain that? How do you respond to critics on that?
Sure. If you look at the articles and the investigation, I think stopped in May of 15, and so we closed our project in that summer of 15. And if you note that what they said is that the contribution for the grants went to the IDA instead of going to an Orange County contribution fund, I think, because the concern was the IDA overseeing that grant program, and it really should be another entity. Again, I'm doing this from the information that's in the article. But when we did our pilot, we were told, okay, the payment, we did fund the grant program, but it did not go to the IDA. It went to that Orange County Funding Association. So, CPV hasn't been called in regard to that. So, we think the structure's been appropriate, and that's what the IDA went back and tried to. They were fixing. The new administration at the IDA was fixing with the Millennium payment. So.
You can understand the concerns besides the environmental issues that are there. There is a distrust among folks in the community to a degree, and elected officials regarding payments or favors. And as Mike says, you have two of these kind of situations, and there's that flow of money and what grants and permits were provided that may not have otherwise been given. And even that skepticism is there.
Well, I think when you read stories like that, you should be skeptical, and you should ask questions, and you should look into it. And then when you find that the permits for this plant were challenged in court and appealed, and in the state of New York, the court said the DEC acted appropriately in issuing the permits. I think that should, you can be eternally skeptical, or you can ask questions and look for answers, and then when you're given an answer, say that makes sense to me or not. Now, if that doesn't make sense, that the court looked at it, and if a court reviewing a regulatory body and saying that they acted appropriately isn't sufficient, then nothing I say will be.
So you'd be surprised if there'd be a third smoking gun?
I don't know that there's a second smoking gun. I don't know if there's a first smoking gun. I guess that's what I'm saying is, these are ongoing investigations, first of all. Nothing's been proven. There's been allegations, and I think we should let the court system work themselves out. Secondly, if you want to look at what's been a part of those investigations, it was around a contract that never occurred and an emissions agreement that has nothing to do with the plan. But that's not what's being alleged. The concern here is that, well, maybe they got permission they shouldn't have. Well, okay, that's a third step. So with that step, how do you address that? Well, they've gone to court. They've been reviewed. It was appealed. It was held up on appeal. There's not much more I can add to that, if that isn't sufficient. On the Millennium thing, there's almost nothing. I don't know. I personally, you'd have to call Millennium. I'm not involved in that. I don't know what's occurred there. I'd be surprised if anything inappropriate occurred. But I don't know. That's just, again, it's one project, but it is two separate companies. And I think when you look at this pipeline lateral, it is separate and distinct of our project in terms of permitting and all that. So I mean, I think I would invite you to reach out to CPV and see what their take on this, the IDA investigation is. William, I'm sorry. I'm CPV. I simply don't know. I'll let them answer.
In that case, the allegation of wrongdoing is directed more at the IDA than Millennium.
Right.
But it still leads someone to believe that if it was improper, it was
People are a
improper.
little surprised to find out is that there's $1 million payment
Yeah.
tied into all of this. That, and you said you made a payment as well. I think anytime you see an IDA soliciting payments for anything in the course of approving tax breaks, somebody wonders if there's something unusual going on, even though it's not going to, say, the chairman of the IDA, it's going to a fund that's distributed in the community.
Yeah.
It just seems a little odd.
I guess, and to your point, though, it's an investigation of the IDA, maybe the practice, but it seems as though that has been a common practice with the IDA, that they're trying to, as part of the tax incentives, use money to fund these grant programs to start other businesses, local businesses. So it seems like that's been their part of their practice. But again, like I said, with the investigation stopped in May, they went backwards for, it sounds like, the IDA seemed to get the structure at least appropriate with the funding agency or entity going forward from May, and we came in after that point.
Okay. Do you think there's any potential middle ground between you and these opponents of the plant, or is there any potential to meet and try to work things out, or is it simply a binary situation where the only thing would be happy if there's no problem?
I'm frustrated at our inability to communicate. He gets up to speak at a local town hall and someone jumps in and says, this man's evil. I don't know. We've had to have police go to people's homes because they're threatening us online. We've had people trespass. I think if there is a reasonable opportunity to exchange ideas and data, that would be welcome. If it's a shouting match, there's such little value that comes out of those because they're not, like I said, I have solar in my house. I consider myself a very strong environmentally conscious person. For the life of me, I can't see how someone can look at this and say it's an environmental issue because it's reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's reducing our dependence on gas coming into the state. It's increasing reliability. It's lowering costs. Those are just facts. Those aren't things you can necessarily debate. You may not like them or think that they're sufficient. Maybe it's not. Maybe that's not enough for a new plant in someone's mind. But those aren't arguable. Those are things that are occurring. I think an open dialogue is always better than shouting at each other. We've tried not to shout people down, but at some point you have to stand up and say, okay, that's enough. When you say that we're going to flood Manhattan, when you say we're the largest plant in the state when we're not even in the top 10, when you continually say that we're building on a Native American burial ground when that's been definitively proven to be not true, it's getting to the point where the plant is going to start operations. You're going to start seeing emissions. We need to make sure that there's a stronger filter of truth for what the community hears and sees. And that's why we've done direct mailings, because we've found that we took a full page ad trying to explain what's coming, because it's important that it's not our opinion that comes out, it's what's important is what's the data, and let people draw their own decisions.
I guess just to add to Tom's point, I mean, we started in 2008 when this project went public. We didn't have this opposition, this level of opposition until fairly recent, late in the project, and that's because we did a lot to answer these questions. We worked with the community, and you know, there was opposition then. We sat down with them, we talked to them, we educated them on the project. We did additional studies when they were requested. We reviewed the results with the opposition, with the planning board and the lead agency. So, as we've talked about here today, a lot of the questions that seem to be coming up now are all ones that have been asked and documented, actually thoroughly vetted in the body of work that's been done over the 7 years of permitting the plant. But just to your point, Mike, I think we've always been open to a good, productive dialogue, and I think that's why we were, for the first 6 years of this project, 7 years of the project, things were very smooth in terms of our relations with the community. So, but I think we're always open to a dialogue as long as it could be productive.
There have been events we've been invited to that we just didn't go to because it was clearly not intended to be that. It was intended to be, sort of a rally and have one of us sit up there and take body blows all day. It just doesn't help.
But that being said, during development, we had a standing policy that we would meet with anybody interested in the project. And as Steve has indicated, there were a number of people who came forth. The Goshen Environmental Committee remains one. We sat around a table just like this with them for 2-3 hours one night and worked through all the issues and made sure they had the information they needed. And that was not a unique case. We did that. We went to the senior center right over here. Any group of people we could find in the community that would sit, we wanted to brief them on the project. And we, as you guys know, we came in here probably on a 6-month to 9-month basis to make sure that all that information was getting out through the normal channels as well. So this idea that we're somehow flying under radar is another one of those things that I just don't know how it continues to stand up.
And I wouldn't say that in past tense. We remain committed to meeting with him. I mean, we've given tours. A former reporter, we spent 4 hours on giving him a tour and answering his questions. I mean, that stands as an open invitation. Again, as long as it's as long as there's a reasonable intent in the meeting, we'll meet with anybody. I mean, we're developing a relationship with West Point's engineering program. Those are all great things. But there are people, again, as I remind myself, if I lived here, I'd have questions too. And we need to be able to answer those questions. There's nothing wrong with those. It's at some point you have to decide whether or not the answers are sufficient for you to either support or not support the plan. And maybe they're not. Maybe all of this information, someone's still against the plan. That's their prerogative. But they don't have license to change the facts. And that's my concern, is there's a lot of people out there that are just looking to be informed, and they deserve the truth.
I keep going back, you made this comment earlier that you just don't understand why someone is opposed to this on the environmental basis.
That's correct.
Can you take any success in saying that of anybody who's come forward on that concern, that you have converted them and convinced them that there is no environmental concerns?
I never said there were no environmental concerns. What I'm saying is if you look at, because it's additional infrastructure, right? And so there's never, you build a house, there's impact, right? If you build infrastructure, bridges, power plants, airports, there's impact. But it can be done responsibly. And what I'm trying to get across is that it is being done responsibly, that we are being, this is started in 2008. That is an exceedingly long time to permit and construct a plant comparatively to the rest of the country. So I would never say there's zero impact to the environment. What I'm saying is, it takes metal, it takes electricity, and it takes gas to build a brand new car. But they run better than an old car, and they have a net benefit to the environment because they're using less gas and they're burning and producing less emissions. That's what I'm saying, is there's a net benefit to what's happening today. Again, if in an arbitrary score, if the score is 100 today, it'll be 90 when we're running in terms of impact to the environment. It'll be better. I'm not saying there's no impact. There's no, wind and solar have impacts to the environment that have to be mitigated. So I wouldn't say there isn't any. Now back to where have we converted some folks? I would say there have been a lot of people that have come forward, and I don't want to put them on the spot necessarily, but I can tell you, yes, I've had conversations with people where I've walked them through and they go, okay, I understand it.
So they get the aha moment.
They get the aha moment. When the biggest aha moment I think most people get is when you say we're displacing older generation that's on today. I think people have in their head, and reasonably so, that you have today and then you're adding this, and so you're net worse, because that's the way the world in the energy business has been for 30 years. Energy growth has been, 3, 5, 6%, and you added generation to meet the demand. Now that it's flat, the aha moment is you're actually reducing older generation that's running today when these come online. There is no math that says that's incremental in emissions or gas use. You can't get there. That's an aha moment it'll have.
Okay.
I think another one is water. The plant design uses 85% water than a traditional design, and the water that we're using is municipal wastewater. That's another aha moment. They have concerns about
85%
river.
less.
That's what I said, 85% less than traditional. And that's another, because they're concerned about water quality, river keeper, those types of things. Using municipal wastewater, retreating it and send it back cleaner than you got it, that's an aha moment to some folks, from the environmental perspective. So those are the two big ones. And that's why I say it's hard for me to understand how, with that plate, how you would prefer the status quo. Because that's what you're competing with.
Mhm.
You're not competing with a zero emission, no impact solution. But for us, what comes in when you point goes away?
But the environmental risks are greater than wind and solar. And there's the uncertainties as well. And even if it's not you, the fracking that's delivering the energy that you need contributes as well.
It will contribute less with us here, and you can't put 680 megawatts of wind and solar in Lawrence Valley. That's not the alternative. That isn't the real answer. Truly, is more transmission lines and bring power in from the northern part of the state.
So we'll give you the power, but it may come it's going to come at some cost. Maybe not financial cost, but if you want the power.
Yeah, certainly. Like my dad said, nothing ever came for free, right? But my point is, based on what you have today, like you said, wind and solar would be less impact. Those aren't options for here. That just, you're not putting. You need roughly 5 acres for 1 megawatt of solar in New York. So for 600 megawatts, how many acres is that? And show me on the map where you're going to do that. And by the way, they have a 10% capacity factor, which means you only get 10% of the value of that megawatt. So you'd have to do that times 10. That's real. That's the real alternative math. That's what you have to look at if you want to say, I want to do this renewables. That's not me just throwing up smoke. That's where we're at in upstate. We're not Arizona.
Is it possible that any point closing means that you won't displace anything, that because they're off the grid, that no older plants will be taken out of service?
All of our studies were with them and we would displace generation. So we modeled them in, and again, the way it's dispatched is they're down here in the bid stack. So we would never displace them. We're going to displace the more expensive stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So them going away means this would have shifted up to here, right? And now with us, it's only going to shift up to here. So we're still displacing.
So it's either you display something or the lights go out. And those are the two potential outcomes.
I think
either everything's running.
There's a reason
and the
Lord.
lights are on,
No.
and you displace somebody, or there's not enough.
Or there's not enough. There's a reason the new capacity zone was put in here, right? It's because you're in a constrained area. You don't have the ability to import the power that you need. So you either improve that or you add generation, or you reduce your demand, right? Or you do all three, and to a degree, the state will do, eventually, hopefully, all three. I mean, energy efficiency is incredibly valuable, but it has its limits. You're not gonna reduce 50%, you're not gonna reduce 20%. New transmission lines, I would venture a guess the people against us will be against those, right? So what is the answer then? I mean, the answer is status quo. We're gonna continue to use 36-year-old gas generators, and we're gonna import more frac gas, we're gonna emit more carbon, and we're gonna operate less efficiently. And some people might pick that as opposed to a new plant because they don't want a different piece of ground turning into a power plant. If that's where they end up, then that's their call. I see it differently. I think if you can reduce carbon by 500,000 tons a year, you do that. You do that. And if you can do that while creating jobs, and if you can do that while providing improved reliability, that's what you do. And we're proud to do that. That's what we do everywhere we build. And that's why I say it's hard for me to get there on an environmental path, because it's just, and I think it's just too important at this point. I think climate change is real. I think we have to go after it. We have to go after it legitimately. We can't pretend that there's some magic power source out there that we can tap into. We have to work with the technologies that are available today.
When you say reduce regional CO2 by 500,000 tons, what is the region you're defining as?
I will leave you the study from the Brattle Group, but it's the Lower Hudson Valley, is I believe how they couched it. But I did bring it, I even earmarked it for you because this thing is thick. But it's within the Lower Hudson Valley. And again, this is an organization that is not for profit and has zero interest in our plan, other than as a study. We didn't pay them.
No concerns about noise factors on the plant at all?
I think you'll be shocked how quiet these things are. You'll hear the interstate more than you'll hear that plant. There's no
Right.
question.
And that was considered as part of the state environmental quality review process.
Right.
Yeah. You'll hear the interstate more than the plant.
Okay, well, I want to let everyone know and remind them that they can watch this editorial board meeting of representatives from CPV can be seen anytime by going to recordonline.com. And I want to thank Steve Remillard, Tom Rumsey, and Stephen Sullivan from CPV for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you
Jim.
for your
Appreciate
time
it.
and attention. We appreciate it.